And I'm here with Dr. David Spiegel. He's a professor and associate chair of psychiatry and behavioral sciences at Stanford School of Medicine, and also the co-founder and chief scientific officer at Reverie Health. Dr. Spiegel, welcome to the Optimal Performance Podcast.
Thank you, Sean. I'm delighted to be here with you.
You know, I shared this before we turn on the recording button, which is I'm sort of a dumber Huberman, like into the same stuff, cold exposure, personal development, biohacking, just not obviously not from Stanford. Your interview with Dr. Huberman was so dense and so full of insight. It really, really blew my mind. And what I want to do is ask some of those same questions, but I'll start with the basic question you've been asked 1,000 times is, what is hypnosis actually?
Sure, actually. Like what is love actually, right? Hypnosis is just a state of highly focused attention. It's something like, have you ever gotten so caught up in a good movie that you kind of forget you're watching the movie and you enter the imagined world?
Yeah.
It's been called believed in imagination. So hypnosis is like looking through a telephoto lens in a camera. What you see with great detail, but you're less aware of the periphery. So it gives you this sense of absorption, of engagement in what it is that you're studying. And you kind of are less aware of the me sitting here observing it and more me in it, experiencing it. I become it, it becomes me, believed in imagination. And so that's a powerful thing because you can absorb and learn and enjoy absorbing and learning in a more intense way in hypnosis than you do in ordinary experience, where you might be sitting there and thinking, I really ought to get back online and answer a bunch of emails or do something else. And I have a lunch coming up, and it allows you to really intensely focus. What helps to make that possible is a second component, dissociation, putting outside of conscious awareness things would ordinarily be in consciousness. So right now, Sean, I can see your shoulders. I presume you're sitting in a chair, and I presume you have sensations in your body, your legs, your bottom, your back touching the chair. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
But I also hope that you are not even aware of those sensations until I brought it into your attention. That's an everyday form of dissociation where you just put outside of awareness things that could be in awareness. And that contributes to your ability to focus on what you want to focus on. You're not distracted by all kinds of input. And that's what our brains do. It's remarkable how they process all this information, but help you select what part of it you need to engage with at that particular moment. The third component, so we've got absorption, dissociation. The third is what scares people the most about hypnosis, and that's suggestibility. I can make you cluck like a chicken or make the football coach dance like a ballerina in front of people and things like that. That I don't like using anything to make people feel foolish or silly or do something irrelevant. But the notion of suggestibility, because, look, we're all susceptible of social influence. We're social creatures. We use language to learn and engage in the world and all that. And that means sometimes we can be misled by people. God knows, 70% of Republicans think Trump won the election. There are all kinds of things that people get dragged down the path of. So being capable of responding to social input is just an ordinary part of human existence. What is called suggestibility is really cognitive flexibility. It's the capacity to say, I'm going to try out looking at this problem from a totally different way. So, and in contrast to traditional psychotherapy, and I do it sometimes, where you try to get people to understand what's wrong with them and then find a method of changing, either from understanding better how you were raised as a kid or from taking steps in cognitive behavioral therapy. You do it from the bottom up. You just say, let me just see what it would feel like if I were different. Let me just see when I'm stressed out, if I can imagine focusing on what's stressing me, but keeping my body floating as if it were in a bath or like a hot tub or floating in space. Can I disconnect my physiological reaction to stress from the thing that is stressing me and maybe handle the stressor better? Or if I want to stop smoking, what would it be like if instead of worrying about the urge to smoke and, oh God, I've been doing it for all these years and all that, I thought, for my body, smoking's a poison. Think of your body as if it were your baby. Would you ever put tar and nicotine into the lungs of your baby? Hell no. Well, guess what? Your body is as dependent on you as your baby is.
Mm,
So if you just try out a different point of view and focus on that intently, you can change behavior. And we're getting 1 out of 5 people with a single session of using Reverie to stop smoking. And the rest of them who keep smoking cut their tobacco use by about 50%. So you don't have to go through this long, painful process. That's what's cool about hypnosis. You can just shift gears and say, what would it be like if I were different? If I let go of these set up presumptions about who I am and just tried being different. And so it's absorption, dissociation, and cognitive flexibility. And that's a fertile ground for change, for
mm.
experiencing the way you interact with your body differently, and for letting go of assumptions that have imprisoned you. I can't stop because I'm addicted or something. And just say, let me see what it'd be like if I did it.
Mm.
And a lot of people do it.
So is once you are in a hypnotic state or a highly suggestible state, whether it's through the app or with a person, and you entertain this alternative perspective about yourself or about your behavior, then does
Mhm.
that run within the subconscious so that it is then sort of integrated into the way that we operate all the time? Because I imagine that once that's been effective, you're not really thinking about not smoking. You just have entertained this idea that you would prefer not to, and then that just sort of underlays your. Is it? I mean, is it working on the subconscious?
Well, it's an interesting point. The older there was a hypnotist named Milton Erickson who sort of kept the tradition alive in medicine in the about 100 years ago. And his idea was that the conscious mind gets in your way, and the subconscious knows what to do. And if you just silence your conscious mind, your unconscious will solve its problems. Now, he was an admirable guy who he carried the torch for a long time. But the thing is, my own feeling is, if my subconscious knew what to do, it would be doing it. And so it's not a matter of, the subconscious is great and the conscious is a problem. It's more a matter of, how do you interact with your mind and all the things that it processes in a way that you can take advantage of the best possibilities and use them. So there is this idea. It is true that once you've had this experience of changing your assumptions and your perspective on it, that may well stick because you discovered, hey, this works. I feel better. I wake up in the morning and my breath doesn't smell bad and I can breathe more freely, or I've had a good night's sleep that I haven't had in years. We had one Reverie user who wrote this really angry email about how she was having technical difficulties keeping the app open and all that. And she said, and the reason this makes me so mad is it's the first time I've been able to sleep in 15 years,
Mm.
So that's great. So people, when they have that experience, they say, oh, I want more of this. So it's not that there's some magic dividing line between conscious and unconscious. Most of the things that go on in our brain, we are not conscious of. If we were conscious of all the things you and I are doing right now, we would just grind to a halt. There's physical position, there's hunger, there's breath, there's digestion, all kinds of things the brain is doing. And so it is the case that when you kind of stumble upon a new model, there's enough reinforcement for it that you can keep doing it. But it's not that there's some magic dividing line between the conscious mind and the unconscious mind. It is the case that in hypnosis, you can sometimes access components of your mental activity that you haven't thought about for a long time. And when I work with people with trauma, that they'll try not to be thinking about things, and you can bring them to the surface and help them reconceptualize them and feel differently about the kind of problem they were dealing with. And that can be very powerful. But it can also be everyday kinds of things where I've learned, to just not care whether somebody's smoking around me. I wouldn't think of doing that to my body. And that's not the way I felt, a week ago. So there isn't, people tend to think that there's some superpower in the unconscious, and if you just kind of let it happen in your unconscious, it'll change the way you are. It's more a matter of reshuffling your experiences and see what comes to the top if you can put aside your usual presumptions and try out something different. And then you can perpetuate that if you want.
Yeah, that's really well said. The what comes to mind is, let's take trauma for example. And I have a little cognitive sort of hiccup happening in which, in psychotherapy and working with a therapist, oftentimes you're sort of instructed or guided to go to that place of trauma, or to like nourish that inner child, to actually go there and to actually process and understand and shift your perspective around that trauma. Whereas the what I'm thinking and what I'm hearing from you is that hypnosis doesn't necessarily process that trauma. Like, you didn't do anything wrong, Sean. You're not responsible for X. You were a kid. Like, that maybe that's processing. Whereas hypnosis is, hey, let's just like let it go. Is it, am I hearing that correctly?
No, actually, you pose the question well, but I'll give you an example like that, Sean, that is shows how with hypnosis. The thing is, the presumption is with sort of standard psychotherapy, you've got to do it step by step and take a lot of time. And sometimes I've done that with patients, but I had a woman come to me about a year ago who grew up in a country that is famous for mistreating women. She said she left as a teenage girl. She said, I realized my body wasn't my own. Men could say anything they wanted to about me. It was humiliating. And she initially came because she had pain, and she was very effectively using hypnosis to control her pain. But she'd been depressed most of her life. She got to the US, she became a healthcare professional, but she retired early. She was so depressed. And she said to me, when I was 12 years old, I was raped by my landlord. And my parents didn't do anything about it, even though they knew about it, because they were afraid we'd be thrown out of the apartment. So I had her in hypnosis go back and say, I want you to be mother to your own 12-year-old self. And I want you to picture yourself just after you'd been raped. And this was a violent, awful rape. And I said, and she starts to cry. And so she's reliving it, as if it were happening. But the good thing about hypnosis is you can dip into it and experience it, and then you can turn it off again. You have more control over it. It's not like you're now swimming in it forever. And I said, I want you to look at yourself as that 12-year-old and answer this question for me. Is this her fault? And she starts crying harder, and she's saying, I'm stroking her hair. I'm stroking her hair. And she comes out of the hypnosis and she says, I feel different. I feel lighter somehow. Mm. And a week later, she called me up and she said, my psychiatrist wants to know what you did to me because I'm not depressed anymore. And he'd been treating her with meds for years, Mm. She said, my friends don't recognize me, And 6 months later, I just got a text from her saying, I thank God for the doctor who referred me to you. And you've changed my life. So there are times when you can use hypnosis not to push it away or avoid it, but to deal with it in a way that gives you a different perspective. And most sexual assault victims blame themselves for events they didn't control. They'd rather feel guilty than helpless. And so you can use hypnosis to deal with those things and to very starkly confront the situation, but see it from a different point of view. And that's what I mean about letting go of your ordinary presumptions. You can be cognitively flexible and see the same event, including dealing with the affect that comes with it, but from a totally different perspective. And just see it as something that was done to you. And she said that she allowed herself to have a sense of anger at this bastard that she'd never allowed herself to feel before, that she kept saying, I shouldn't have done this, I shouldn't have done that. And just see it for what it was. So hypnosis is not about covering it up or forgetting it at all. I've had people ask me, can you hypnotize me to make me forget some horrible thing? And I say, A, I can't, and B, even if I could, I wouldn't, because that's not the best way for you to deal with it. And if you want to really deal with it in a way that allows you to move beyond it, then this is one way to do it.
So it's the tool. It's the tool, the technique to go in and do some of that reframing or some of that re-experiencing to help heal and grow. I love that.
Exactly. Wow. Exactly. Yeah.
I did not expect to go here, but I suddenly find myself wondering about free will. And this is not a philosophy podcast, but
Yeah.
does free will come into play here?
Well, it's interesting. My friend and colleague Robert Sapolsky has just published a book called Determined, about how none of us has any free will. And so I guess he didn't have any free will about writing the book. But um, yeah, I think it's an interesting question. I was a philosophy major in college, and I like thinking about those things. I think what is fundamental, I mean, look at how the brain is wired and look at how we live. The brain is wired with millions of interconnections among neurons. It's about making connections. And we now know that there's long-term potentiation where the more neurons fire, the more they set up circuits that tend to keep firing together, wiring together. Firing together is wiring together. And there's long-term depression where you begin to disconnect. And a lot of what our brains do at night when we sleep is get rid of the old connections we don't need. Because if we kept adding connections, our brains would explode out of our skulls. So that's one reason I think we have to sleep, is to allow our brains to rewire. So making connections is fundamental to neural processing. And I think what we do as functioning humans is make connections with one another, with ideas, with mind and body, and pruning and reshaping those connections. Now, you could argue that the whole thing is deterministic and just what I'm exposed to. You and I are just sort of two robots, bouncing off each other, and I'm changing your wiring, you're changing mine to some extent. But I don't think so. I think as important in understanding the brain and how we work as science is and genetics is, I think there's some aspect to it that is just a miracle, that you
Yeah.
and I are sitting here smiling at each other and talking. And it would be hubris of me to say I can fully explain that in deterministic ways. I
Right.
don't think so. I think it's just a miracle. And when I watch people facing death, they say, on the one hand, when they finally get the courage, one of my group therapy patients said it's like looking into the Grand Canyon when you're afraid of heights. If you fell down, it would be a disaster, but you feel better about yourself because you're able to look. I can't say I feel serene, I can look at it. So the perspective they have is the thing they have most feared, looking into the abyss and facing the end of your existence, also reminds you what a bloody miracle existence is. And the fact that you've been able to experience it all. And it's what people after psilocybin trips who are dying of cancer say, that, I mean, I would personally think that the potential of having a bad trip while I was dying would discourage me from taking a psychedelic. But you know what? These people come out of it and they're different. And they just say, I could see how miraculous it was that I have existence for however long I have it. And I don't want to lose it, but I'm just blessed that I have it. And so I can't believe that there isn't something that we just don't fully understand. And another example of scientific hubris was the idea that genetics is all totally determined. That Lysenko, this Russian biologist 100 years ago, was crazy when he said that we inherit acquired characteristics. And I had a biology professor who said, if we inherit acquired characteristics, why is it that we still have to perform circumcisions? That hasn't gone away. But we now know that the tendency for genes to be expressed, epigenetics, is very much determined by the environment. And so even, what seemed like the most clearly deterministic kind of biology, which is genetics, isn't quite as deterministic as we thought it was. And so I just think, science explains a lot, but it hasn't yet explained everything. And I don't believe that you and I are just doing what we were programmed to do.
Yeah. If we don't have the tools to measure outcomes, then we're left in wonder, right? We're left in reverie, in thought, in possibility. And I tend to disagree, fervently against against determinism. and maybe it's all the psychedelics that I take and have taken, and maybe it's,
Mhm.
maybe it's my spiritual practice. But yeah, the way that I was thinking about it was, if we can become hypnotized and we can develop new parts of ourselves for good, or for personal development, then it's an operating system that's happening inside of our brain that we are maybe either not conscious of at all, or happening without our sort of awareness. And so, but I no, I agree with that. Um,
Yeah.
um, there's so much here. My father, who I mentioned before we turned the recording button on, is a behaviorist, and I shared with you
Mhm.
that we had mice named Burris and Skinner, and he found some success with self hypnosis, in which he was making
Really?
recordings with his own voice,
Huh.
uh, and so I'm curious about the distinction between being hypnotized and developing your own practice with your own voice. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on, is there a distinction or difference or value?
I actually think, Sean, that all hypnosis is self-hypnosis. That what people allow me to do when I have the privilege of working with them is to help them learn to better structure their own hypnotic experience. And that what goes on in hypnosis is just a more intense focus. I mean, there are studies that show of the trait absorption. There are people who more easily get into sunsets in movies and lose themselves in plays and in drama than others, and they tend to be more hypnotizable than others. So for some people, that's just their style of being much of the time. Maybe not all of the time, but much of it. And I think what hypnosis allows you to do is to sort of pretend to wipe the slate clean and approach a problem from a novel point of view and see what it feels like. And it's the intensity of focus, the dissociation, and the openness to being something or someone different than you usually think you are, the cognitive flexibility that makes that possible. And so it's interesting he did it in his own voice. And I like that model because it's so different from the old idea that the powerful hypnotist, coerces you into doing something you wouldn't otherwise do, because he was his own hypnotist in that sense. That was the model of all hypnosis, is really self-hypnosis. And apparently, did he respond to it? Did he find that it helped him?
He did.
So he did. How did he respond? What did he do?
It was around his relationship to food. It was appetite,
Mm,
and I found, he found this vein of, this sort of present first person present tense positive, which is, I eat healthy nutritious foods. I feel satiated quicker, that sort of a thing. And it really was effective for him.
that's great. And one of the things we say is focus on what you're for. People who use hypnosis
Right.
love to say, the worst thing you can say to someone is don't think about purple elephants. I mean, what do you do? So instead, he did a variant of what we do with people. I have a guy named Adam who I know pretty well, who used Reverie. He said that he was looking at some photos of a party, and he thought, hey, there's this guy who was dressed the same way I was, only he was a guy who had like a big pot belly, big. And his son said, Dad, that isn't somebody else, that's you. And he had just was so disconnected
Mm.
from how much weight he put on and what he looked like. And he started using Reverie. And what we do is tell people to not say don't eat. That's the worst thing you can say. Say, for my body, too much food is a poison. I need my body to live. I owe my body respect and protection. So it's that same, protective parental role for your own body. Would you stuff food into the mouth of your cat or your dog or your baby that it didn't want to eat? No. So eat with respect for your body. Eat when you're hungry, and the minute your body tells you it's full, stop. I don't care if you've got a plate full of food, you put it in the fridge and eat it some other time. Focus on what you're for, respecting and protecting your body. He said he realized he could eat better if he walked more. He said, I used to be the kind of person who, spend 5 minutes driving to get a closer space in the parking lot to the store. He said, now I walk to the store. He walks between Palo Alto and Mountain View, where his work is, and walks back. That's a long walk. We met him for dinner once, and he had walked from one end of Palo Alto to the other when, he could have driven there in 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. And he has lost 60 pounds. He's slim as a rail. And he just learned to sort of reset his brain to be a different kind of person in relation to food. And so just like what your dad did. And so the nice thing is it doesn't have to be all that painful if the approach involves your intense focus, concentration, and a strategy that makes sense, where you can affiliate with that. The cool thing about it is you can also feel good from the moment you start doing it. I'm going to be a better parent to my own body. That feels good. And rather than feeling I'm depriving myself of that extra slice of pie or something like that, you're focusing on what you're for. So you get, behavioral psychologists know that the best way to change behavior is intermittent positive reinforcement. You don't say, don't do this. You say, good for you. You did it. The nurses at the hospital here were trying to get doctors to gel their hands before they went into every patient room. And the committee was proposing that a nurse criticize a doctor if he goes in without it. And I said, bad idea. I say, you wait until you see a doctor doing it and you walk over and say, thank you, doctor. I really appreciate you doing that. That's how you're going to change behavior. And so this is the same thing. You find something that you can affiliate with and feel good about from the moment you make the commitment to do it.
Yeah, beautiful. Well said. I can't help but see the connections, some of the themes around, some of the positive thought movement. I think about Dr. Joe Dispenza, one of my favorite episodes I've ever recorded. This one's getting up there, but one of my favorites is with Bruce Lipton. And and he spoke really clearly about mantra and affirmation as a way to sort of positively reinforce, just like you were saying, certain behaviors or certain points of view, certain ways of being and thought process about the self on a path toward personal development. And I'm curious if you see the connection there, and I'll take it one step further. It almost feels a little bit like The Secret. It feels almost a little bit like, inner alchemy, manifestation practices through this orientation around positive outcomes. Any thoughts on the connections I'm making there?
Yeah, sure. I think, if we use this neural model, Sean, of, neurons that fire together, wire together, what kind of circuits do you want to build in your brain? And if you're the kind you want to build are the kinds that involve affirmation, self-respect, pleasure, things you like. You want to play that record again. You just want to do it. So positive reinforcement is that I feel good about doing this, or my friend said something really nice to me and it makes me feel better. You'd much rather have that background music playing than, oh God, this guy yelled at me again. He told me not to do it and I shouldn't do it. And so you tend to avoid it. So do you want to build neural connections, long-term potentiation in neuroplasticity for things that tend to make you feel good, and you want to play that one over and over because you feel good when you do it? Or, oh God, this is awful. I just, touched an open circuit and got a shock. You don't want that. So I think it is the case that number one, it feels better, and number two, it works better. That you find a way to elicit something good. And that's even in dealing with very serious problems. When I deal with people with trauma, it's, what did you do to protect yourself when this happened? Not that, it happened, it's terrible, but how did you try to protect yourself? I had a woman in hypnosis who wanted to identify the face of her assailant, and because it was getting dark when he had attacked her, and she couldn't give the police a description. She apparently fought him off. She fought so hard she got a basilar skull fracture, but he did not rape her. So the cops kind of lost interest because the rape hadn't happened, and they didn't know she didn't have the seizure yet before she had to go to the hospital. So she's looking at this guy in hypnosis, body safe and comfortable. And she said, I can't really see what his features are, but I realized something I didn't realize at the time. He didn't just want to rape me, he wanted to kill me.
Mhm.
And so it was worse than she thought. That's bad. That's negative reinforcement, right? On the other side, I said, so what did you do to protect yourself? And so she had a visual screen like our Zoom screen right now, where, bad guys over there. What did you do to protect yourself? And she said, you know what? He's surprised I'm fighting that hard. He didn't think I would. So what she realized out of it was, on the one hand, it was a much worse situation than she thought it was. But on the other hand, she probably saved her life. And before that, she was thinking, if I just hadn't fought that hard, I wouldn't have had the skull fracture. And she realized that she'd saved her life. So it helped her to find something positive, even in this horrible situation, that helped her to get better and deal with it. So I think the idea, I think it is a profound truth that find a positive way, an honest positive way to reframe, reconceptualize your experience, and you'll be more inclined to stick with that. And so, rather than I've had people trying to stop smoking who say, oh, I just have an urge and I need to, and I'm an addict. And I'll tell them nobody has ever died of nicotine withdrawal, but millions of people die every year from smoking. So take your pick, but instead of worrying about, I say, don't worry about withdrawal. Let me worry. I'm your doctor. I'll worry about that. It's not going to kill you. The smoking will kill you. Focus on what you're for. I'm respecting and protecting my body. And just think about how much more easily that circuit will get built and be replayed because you like it, rather than this miserable, poor me, I can't follow the urge, I'm jittery and all this stuff, and I have to have more nicotine in my body. So it makes sense to me that it is a kind of secret clue to how to make our brains work better and work for us better. And that is by finding a method of positive reinforcement rather than negative.
Do we know the percentage of people who are hypnotizable versus those who aren't?
Yeah, we do. If we're talking about 8-year-olds, they're all hypnotizable. All 8-year-olds are in trances all the time. You call your kid in for dinner, he doesn't hear you. He's doing work and play are all the same thing. It's a wonderful time of life. It's a shame we try to make kids into little adults because childhood is so much fun. It's just so cool. But as we go through what are called formal operations in adolescence, where we start to understand logical reasoning, that the tall, skinny vase is not as big as the short, fat one because it's narrower. Some people lose some of that hypnotic ability. So they don't get as lost in the appearance of things, and they get more into the analysis of things, which is an important part of maturation. By the time you're 21, your hypnotizability is pretty set for life. And it's as stable a trait as IQ throughout adult life, very stable. There was a study done at Stanford where former Psych 1 students were retested blind to their original scores, 0.6 test-retest correlation. Now, that's as good as IQ. IQ might be 0.7, but very close, which is really remarkable for a trait like this. And it's about 2/3 of the adult population are at least somewhat hypnotizable, and about 15% are extremely hypnotizable. So there is a third that just aren't, but they can use these same kinds of strategies. It's just a little more effort for them to do it than the more hypnotizable people.
Oh, that's encouraging.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
on Reverie, we actually have a hypnotizability test people can take in about 6 minutes and learn how hypnotizable you are. Are you the high, the poet, just gets into your experience and flows with it? Are you more the diplomat, where you have the experience and then you think about it and wonder was that for real, and you try it again, and it's more interactive? And then there's about a third who we call the researchers, who just aren't very hypnotizable and have to think everything through first. But if you think things through the right way, I've had people stop smoking using that same approach, and it takes more efforts. But after 2 or 3 efforts, we had one woman who just said, I just did it. I realized it did not make sense for me to smoke. Now, the highs would say, I couldn't imagine doing something that awful to a dog or to my baby. Why would I do it to my body? They get the more emotional connection to it. Whereas others, go with this affirmation approach, but they do it in a more rational, logical, step-by-step way, and that's fine too.
That's interesting. I definitely want to talk about Reverie and how it works, and what what the
Mhm.
process is. I definitely want to get into that, but I wonder if you're up for a little lightning round where I will give you some sort of situation, some affliction, somebody that's something to deal with, and then you can tell me either yes, hypnosis can help it, no, or it depends. You can take the easy way out and say it depends, but I hope you don't. So,
Go for it,
um,
Sean.
depression.
Depression. Yes, but there are times when people are so depressed that they can't concentrate well enough. They feel so down about themselves, and their brains don't work so well, and they'll tell you that. In which case, you've got to get them to the point where they can experience hypnosis, and then it can help them deal with many of the issues that would tend to keep someone depressed. So it depends on how depressed they are. I'd say at the more extreme end, there are techniques ranging from medication to some very promising new results with transcranial magnetic stimulation now. A colleague of mine, Nolan Williams, is innovating with that at Stanford now, and it's around the country now. People can get it. So there are biological approaches that may be primary if you're pretty depressed, but with garden variety depression and sadness, hypnosis can be helpful in putting things into perspective. So it wasn't a yes, no, or maybe quite, but
It was yes,
that's
but
just
that fair
yeah.
enough.
Okay.
Overeating.
For sure. For sure. Hypnosis will help you focus on eating with respect for your body, on paying attention to your hunger and satiety cues and honoring them. And the answer is clearly yes.
Grief.
Yes, it can help with grief. It can help you put it in perspective. We've used hypnosis in breast cancer support groups. Am I allowed to go on this much longer, or just give
Sure.
the answer?
Yeah.
Yeah. Where people at the end of a meeting would grieve the deaths of members of the group. And they would picture in hypnosis, on the one hand, the just facing the loss that this person is no longer with us, and the obvious issues of identification with the person who died because I have the same illness. And on the other hand, what did she leave with you that you still have today?
Mm.
What did she teach you? What feelings did she elicit in you that you can still feel? So you make it not all or none, but both and. Yes, she's gone, but I've still got something from her.
Mm. Beautiful. Cancer.
Uh, it can certainly help people. It's a very effective analgesic. Women in these groups, for example, when they would get, a new chest pain, they think, "Oh my God, the cancer's spreading. It's new metastasis. I'm going to die tomorrow," kind of thing. And once I taught them to imagine they were floating in a bath, a lake, a hot tub, or floating in space, feel the sense of warm, tingling numbness, they could control the pain. And it didn't prove that it wasn't a metastasis, but it also didn't constantly associate the sensation in their chest with some rapid progression of the cancer. And
Mm.
so by the end of a year in this randomized trial, the women who were taught that had half the pain the control group did on the same and very low amounts of medication. So yes, it can help people deal with pain and other kinds of cancer-related stress for sure.
Confidence.
Yes, look at me. I'm very. it yes, it can enhance confidence because again, it can. um, you can use it to focus on doing your best and building confidence. Give yourself grounds for building confidence. So, for example, the Stanford women's swimming team they're very good. They've won all kinds of meets and awards and Olympic competitions. But the coach a while ago noticed that the women were swimming faster times in practice than they were in meets. Now, swimming is not a contact sport, right? It doesn't really matter what the woman in the next lane is doing. It's not like water polo, where you got to fight the opponent. So what they were doing was distracting themselves from their relationship with their body and swimming their best race by worrying about what the girl in the next lane was doing. So I had them in practice just go into a state of self-hypnosis and picture how you're relating to your body and the water when you're swimming your best race. And the times in the meets went up because they were focused more on what mattered, which is how they related to their body and the water and the pool, and less on whatever the hell was going on in the next lane. So yes, you can enhance your confidence, not in a phony artificial way, but by doing things that give you confidence and focusing on what matters in your performance, which is how, in this case, how you relate to your body and how your body relates to the fluid around it. That's what really matters, not what the girl next door is doing.
I'm seeing themes here that are really cool. Sleep, the answer is a firm yes.
Firm yes, absolutely. Sleep is basically a relinquishing of sympathetic activation. It's like slowing your heart rate, lowering your blood pressure. It's why a loud noise or your damn alarm clock will wake you up. It's because suddenly there's this event that triggers your arousal network, the salience network, and gets you going. Sleep is the predominance of the parasympathetic self-soothing component of the autonomic nervous system. And as you allow yourself to self-soothe, you allow yourself to sleep. So you can learn to dissociate any thoughts you have that might disturb you from your physiological reaction to them and get your body prepared to go to sleep. And so the answer is clearly yes.
Psychosis.
This again is it's sort of a no, but in general, people who are psychotic have trouble concentrating well enough and in a consistent enough way to experience hypnosis. And so we found that the hypnotizability of people who have schizophrenia, for example, is about half that of normal people. So their score is like 3 to 4 out of 10. Normal people, it's 7 to 8 on average. So they just can't concentrate well enough. And the distinction between self-hypnosis and some paranoid delusion that somebody is a Martian who's creeping his way into your head and taking over you would not go very well. So many psychotic people, unfortunately, can't. However, there are some people who have what we used to call hysterical psychosis, where they have a psychotic experience that really is a kind of dissociative episode out of control. So I was presented with a patient in an inpatient unit who had a delusion that he was a werewolf, and he would start growling and he wouldn't talk in words, and he was possessed, he said. And he saw a pastor, his pastor of a fundamentalist church, who said, "You're possessed by the demons of Satan." And he believed it. And he turned out to be very hypnotizable. And hypnotizability testing is a very useful way to distinguish between the two. And it turned out that what he was possessed by was his sister's sexuality. They shared a bedroom, and she would sometimes sneak her boyfriend into the bedroom. So he's lying there trying to deal with that as a teenager. And the family didn't know about it. So I said to the mother afterwards, "Get your son his own bedroom." And I didn't particularly say why. And I said, "And don't freak out when he acts like this." So the next time he said he was a werewolf, she said, "I don't care who you are, eat your dinner." So he put his face in the bowl of soup and started lapping it up. But the family didn't freak out about it, and he didn't. The stimulus had been changed. So,
Sure.
and so he got better. So there are rare kinds of psychosis like that can be helped with hypnosis, but the majority, no, they're just not able to be hypnotized.
Obsessive compulsive disorder.
That's a tough one. I would say it's a sort of no, but again, by and large, people who are very obsessional tend not to be very hypnotizable. The people with the hand washing and the germ phobias and all this stuff in general are so preoccupied that they can't let go enough to try on being different. It's too dangerous for them. However, there's a minority of people with OCD who had a traumatic origin to their symptoms, where something bad happened and they responded by becoming overly cautious about everything. So there are some for whom you can, get them to deal with some aspect of the traumatic origin of the trauma and see themselves as not being as vulnerable and helpless as they think they are, and they may get some improvement. But in general, Less likely.
Aging.
I wouldn't know anything about that. Yeah, it can help you with the stresses and strains, the aches and pains. You can just manage. If you think you get in a kind of vicious cycle, an example is rheumatoid arthritis, for example, which older people get. Their joints get kind of stiff and sore. They get some inflammation. And there's a kind of vicious cycle that gets set up because the more your joints hurt, the less likely you are to move them. But that actually gets them on the path of freezing, where they
Mm.
just, so, many people with arthritis find that their worst time is first thing in the morning because they've been lying in bed, not moving very much. And they feel better actually once they get walking and moving. So if you can teach them to manage the pain by recognizing that it's actually, you're not hurting the joint by moving it. Normally we take the pain as a signal. Don't do that. You just broke your arm. Don't do it. In this case, you're misreading the pain signal because if it slows you down from moving, your joint's going to get worse, not better. So moving is a good thing. So I have them imagine you're in a warm bath, warm, tingling numbness, filter the hurt out of the pain, and enjoy that sense of movement the way your leg used to feel, and feel like that again. So for problems like that, it can help. People who start to lose cognitive abilities, that can be more of a problem. And you have to have an reasonably intact memory to remember what to do and remember to do it. So that can be, if the brain itself is becoming, especially affected, it's less likely. But there are a lot of things in aging that you can keep your body moving, keep yourself going, and hypnosis can help you do it more comfortably.
Yeah, I mean, I'm seeing this theme, right? I think it sounds like it's dependent person to person, which makes sense. And also, if you go upstream from the ailment, if you can go upstream to the source of the trauma or the debilitation you experience from this thing or that thing, maybe you can kind of break up that sort of crystallized, sort of fixed mindset so that people can like change their perspective about this thing that's getting in the way of their wellness. And I think that makes it so, I mean, obviously, it makes it really powerful because you never know until you get in there and dig in and try new things and get suggestions that are alternative and productive in your life. And that may lead to, more flexibility physically, mentally, less obsession, treating your body as as the baby or the dog that you want to treat with care and love and nourishment. Fantastic.
Yeah, you're absolutely right that it's, you get into what my colleague in psychology, Ali Crum, calls mindsets, where you make assumptions that bad things are happening. And once you do,
Right.
you start doing things that reinforce the assumptions. I can't use it. I'm damaging it if I use it. And sometimes that's true, but sometimes it isn't. So you want to get in the mindset that this is a signal to me that I've got to pay more attention to this part of my body, but help it heal, help it do better. And she does research. We've just finished a study with cancer patients who freak out, understandably, about the side effects of chemotherapy. And we say to them, think about the fact that what you're experiencing is a powerful drug having an effect on your body. And if it hurts, it may also be hurting cancer cells even more. So it can be a sign of an effective treatment, not a sign that your body is disintegrating. So that kind of, you don't let your expectation put you on this sort of circular path where you wind up where you don't want to be.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and we all have narratives, right? We all have these self-limiting beliefs or automatic negative thoughts that get in the way of us making good choices and productive choices. And
Right.
many of us just don't, we're just not aware of it. We've never inspected that before, And
Right.
my work as a coach is to sort of break up some of those assumptions. Do you feel like you're unworthy? Do you feel like you don't have
Right.
the skill or you can't get this skill or develop this habit?
Right.
And
Right.
once you sort of break down that groove that they've been in for sometimes decades
Right.
through affirmation or psychedelic experiences, which are a big part of
Hmm.
what I do, if you can shift out of that, if you can sort of get out of this groove in the road, and then everything changes. Like the sort of operations, the default mode network, shifts a little bit.
Right.
Uh, yeah,
And that's what in hypnosis, the more you're engaged in something in hypnosis, our MRI studies have shown, the more you inhibit activity in the default mode network.
yeah,
So you sort of shut down that part of your brain that's evaluating what this all means about who you are and what you can do. And you just kind of suspend that for a while and try operating as though that weren't an issue anymore. You don't have to worry right now
yeah.
about where you're heading. Just get into the experience of doing it and you'll do it better.
Yeah. My first foray into entrepreneurship was to start a chain of flotation therapy centers, and float
Mm-hmm.
tanks are super effective at quieting the default mode network, experiencing yourself in a new way. The sort of like the tank sort of meditates you because there's no external stimuli and gravity
Mm-hmm.
and all that thing. And so, I'd be curious about the connections, or in fact, Dr. Roderick Borey from New York, who was a therapist, he would use hypnosis while people were floating in the float tank.
Mm-hmm.
This was in I think the 80s or the 90s that he was doing this work, and he saw incredible effects because you're even more suggestive. The stimuli is reduced so much that you
Right.
are open to, new ideas about yourself. So, um,
Absolutely.
before I ask the final question, which is a fill in the blank question, and I should have budgeted for 4 hours and taken up half of your day on this, because I want to go deeper. But
Right.
um um explain to us how Reverie works. What can people experience when they download the
Sure.
app?
Reverie is just a digital interactive hypnosis app. You download it from the App Store if you have an iOS phone, or Google Play if you have an Android. And it offers you a series of problems you can address using hypnosis. You can test your hypnotizability in about 6 minutes. It'll tell you after you perform some experiences about your hand feeling light and floating in the air, and see how you react to it. So you can decide what degree of hypnotizability you have and how to approach the exercises. And then if you want to deal with stress, you hear my mellifluous voice instructing you how to get your body comfortable and floating, just like you mentioned, with the float tanks, only without the actual tank, and get your body floating as if you were in a bath, a lake, a hot tub, or floating in space. Picture being in a place you enjoy being, so you can already feel that your body feels better and you start to feel better, and you can handle the stress better, because stress stresses us, because we start to notice our body tensing up, heart rate, blood pressure going up, you start to sweat, and then you think, oh my God, this must be really bad. So you get this vicious cycle, like a snowball rolling downhill. You interrupt that by saying, I'm not yet going to try and deal with the stressor. I'm going to try and deal with the effect the stressor has on my body. I can do that. So you can get your body more comfortable, and then problem solve about how to deal. What's one thing you could do that would address the stressor, make it go better? Help people go to sleep, dissociate their physiological arousal from their psychological arousal. Help people deal with fears and phobias. If you have a airplane phobia, I instruct you how to float with the plane, to think of the plane as an extension of your body, like a bicycle, to recognize there's a difference between a probability and a possibility. Anything's possible, but it's not likely. So you can find yourself thinking about flying in an airplane differently. We've talked about smoking, protect and respect your body. So there you can make a choice of a number of problems you can address and see how you feel. And the cool thing about it is you'll know within 15 minutes whether it's likely to help you or not.
Hmm.
And about 85% of people who use it find that after one session, they feel less stressed. Their pain is significantly reduced. And Sean, when you think of the fact that the CDC told us that last year, 82,000 Americans died of opioid overdoses. Opioids are dangerous, especially for chronic use. People get addicted, they get withdrawal, hyperalgesia, they have more pain. Nobody has ever died from hypnosis. And I have patients who have real pain problems, who can just handle it better. They don't fight the pain. They filter their hurt out of the pain. They feel themselves floating in a bath, a lake, a hot tub, or they leave their body and I'm just going to go to Bali and enjoy being there and let my body do what it's doing here. Or they also develop a sense of compassion for their body rather than getting angry at it. And many people who are sick get angry at their body. I say, if your body were a sick child, what would you do? Would you get angry at her? No. They say, I'd give her a hug and I'd comfort her and soothe her. And I say, good, do that to your own body. Mm. So you can try out any or all of these and more different problem-focused hypnosis sessions and see how you feel. And so you can turn it on, and it's interactive. I wanted to make it as much as I could like the experience of being in the office with me. So I'll say, is your arm floating in the air? If it is, you tell me, and you get one instruction. We go on to something else. If not, I help you with that part of it too. So I ask a question, you give answers throughout, and that structures your hypnotic experience. So it's more like being in the office with me. And I used to worry that it's, is it good enough? And then I thought, you know what? If you're waking up in the middle of the night and want hypnosis to go back to sleep, you probably don't want me in your bedroom with you telling you how to do it. But you've got me. You've got me on your smartphone. And so you can use it when and where you want to use it. So that's it. And it's you can enjoy trying it out. And the nice thing is you will know right away whether it's likely to help you or not.
And with your silky pipes, man, you got a voice. When did you realize that you were made to soothe people with your voice?
I don't know. My wife and a good friend of ours had a little folk music band that we used to play around Harvard Square called Free Energy, and I guess I honed my voice singing blues and stuff like that. But
silky, so silky.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear that from you. That's a real compliment, Sean. Thank you.
So this is the last. Obviously, you can find Reverie on the App Store or Google Play. So I encourage, if you're interested in this stuff at all, I always encourage people to look to solutions that are not chemicals first. Eat less, meditate, exercise, get in the cold plunge, get sun on your face, try hypnosis, because it could be the thing. It could be that solution that's not going to harm your body and just open up yourself to higher performance, to optimal performance. So this is the last question. It's a fill in the blank, specifically designed to keep people on their toes. And I've asked this hundreds of times. You can elaborate as much or as little as you like. Everyone would benefit from knowing
how to better use their brain. It's an amazing structure. It's our major evolutionary advantage. 3 pounds sitting on the top of our shoulders, but it does not come with a user's manual. And so there's a lot we can learn about how to use it better, just as we can our bodies. So hypnosis is one of those tools that you can learn to use and exploit and explore your brain's capacities to help you live better and be more comfortable within your body and your mind. So take full advantage of it.
Well said. Dr. Spiegel, thank you so much for joining me today on the Optimal Performance Podcast.
You're welcome, Sean. It was a pleasure performing with you.